Hey everybody! Welcome to the Jayda InStitches show, and welcome back to our 2020 Patchwork Calendar Blanket Project! This month we're going to learn the very fun and very fast 3-patch stripe block. But before we get into that, we have a little bit of project housekeeping to take care of. First of all, we wanted to let you know that the first Friday of every month going forward will be Patchwork Square Day. Patchwork Square. Patchwork Star. That is really close. Patchwork Square Day is the first Friday of every month. That gives you the whole month to work on the square, and you can kind of put it on your calendar. You know when the next installment of the blanket will be. 2. All of these squares and the components that make them up are based on very specific stitch and row counts. So keeping track of your stitch and row counts is very important for this project. That will make sure that all of the squares fit together properly at the end. Having said that, you might notice a little bit of sizing difference between some of the squares. Some of them might feel a little wider or a little taller, or they might just generally size up or size down from the squares you've done previously or just after. Don't worry about it. That is so normal. Even when you make a whole pile of squares that are exactly the same pattern, some of them size a little differently. It really is most important that you pay attention to your stitch and your row counts. And as long as they're correct, everything will work out. And I know some of you are brand new to this kind of a project, and I didn't want you to think you were doing anything wrong. You're not. Squares just sort of have a life of their own sometimes. So keep in mind you want to pay attention to stitch and row count, and everything will be fine. Let's talk about this square. This is a 3-patch stripe, so you can do it in an ABA colorway pattern like I've done. You can continue using the same colors you used in January if you want a super united look in your blanket. Just make sure you're using the same type of yarn, so the same weight and the same fiber and the same hook size that you used for the previous square. And of course, you want to make sure that your border color is the same. Past that, anything goes. You could do 3 completely different colors. You could do the ABA like I did, or remember, this is a square, so you can look at your stripes horizontally or vertically. Having said that, can I just say this also makes a nice patriot square? A little red, white, and blue, maybe a little blue, white, and red, maybe a little red, white, and red. There's a lot of fun you can have with this particular square. We've got some graph color options. Mr. InStitches is going to insert them in here. And like the other project we did, so for every square you do, it's recommended that you sketch yourself out a little graph and color it in so that you can follow along as you're working on the square, and also, you know, play with some colors. You might have a lot of different colors in your stash, and they might look neat together. You don't know until you do a little experimenting. So let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, we'll head on over to the craft table, and we will stitch up the February square together. In order to make our 3-patch stripe square, you're going to want approximately 27 yards or 15 grams of color per stripe. So if you're using an ABA colorway like I am, that's 54 yards or 25 grams approximately of your color A, and around 27 yards or 15 grams of your color B. Don't forget you also need 10 yards approximately of your border color. You also need a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, and the hook we're using is the same one. It's a 5.5 millimeter, also known as an I or a 9 in the US, size 5 in the UK. And if you're enjoying this year's calendar blanket, why not consider supporting our show and becoming a channel member? You'll find the join button underneath the video viewer, and you can click on that button and read all about what it means to become a channel member here at the Jayda InStitches show. And once you've got all of your supplies together, we can get started. Like we did last month, I highly recommend giving yourself a little sketch. So sketch out a square, mark it into 3 even patches, and color them in the desired color pattern that you want to follow. This is really helpful when you're busy crocheting because it'll remind you as we go through the project what color you're on. So this is patch A, patch B, and patch C. We're going to start with patch C, so right here at the bottom of our square. For me, that's going to be blue. We're going to take our yarn and start with a slip knot. and we're going to chain 38 to begin. Once you have 38 chains, we're going to be using the double crochet stitch for this entire square. So we're going to skip the first 3 chains from the hook, find the 4th one, and double crochet into it. Those 3 chains we're skipping are going to count as the first double crochet in this row. So when you count up your stitches at the end of row 1, make sure you count this turning chain as a double crochet. You're going to double crochet into each chain all the way across, and at the end of row 1, including our turning chains, we will have 36 double crochet stitches. At the end of row 1, we'll all have 36 double crochet. That includes those turning chains on the end. At the end of every row, we're going to chain 2. The chain 2 at the end of every row becomes the first double crochet of the next row. Because this turning chain is considered a double crochet stitch, you are not going to be working into that first stitch. So skip that stitch. It will always be accounted for because our turning chains count as a double crochet. Instead, you're going to double crochet into the next stitch and into each stitch all the way across. So including those turning chains, you'll still have 36 stitches at the end of row 2. When you get to the end of row 2, you're going to chain 2, turn, double crochet all the way across. At the end of row 3, you're going to chain 2, turn, continue double crocheting. We're going to double crochet 6 rows in total for our first patch. So 6 rows of double crochet. Each row will have 36 stitches in it. Remember to chain 2 and turn at the end of every row. Remember, as you work across each row, when you get to the last stitch, your last stitch will be those turning chains. We count those turning chains as a double crochet, so you also have to double crochet into the top of them. So you just find the top of those turning chains, double crochet into it, and that will ensure that you have 36 stitches in each row. So don't forget to count your turning chains. 36 stitches in each row, chain 2, turn your work, skip that first stitch, double crochet into the next stitch, and in each stitch across, including the top of those turning chains. All right, I'm going to let you go. I'll see you at the end of row 6. At the end of row 6, we should have a nice big rectangular stripe that looks like this. So you can count your rows. There's row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5, row 6. 6 rows. We're going to fasten off our yarn. No need to chain 2 at the end of row 6. Snip yourself enough tail that you can weave it back and forth in behind some of those stitches, or you can just work over top of it like I like to do. It's entirely up to you. If your stitching isn't very tight, then you may find weaving it in back and forth helps. And if you're going to do that, I recommend you take your needle, bring your needle through a piece of that double crochet stitch at the end, and then underneath some of those stitches. That way you can just sort of bring your needle or bring your yarn down along the edge of your double crochet, and it won't sort of show out the side. So give it a nice little tug. Weave it through some of those stitches, and then you can double back, so double back over top of the last loop, go back through the same stitches. And if you're using a slippery yarn, it's helpful to weave your tail in back and forth at least 3 times. That way it won't come undone. Try not to pull it too taut because you don't want to pull any of your stitches out of alignment. And just weave it back and forth until all those little bits disappear. Nice and neat and tidy. So we've woven our tail in, or you've just snipped it and you're going to work over top of it. Make sure you're still looking at the other side. So here's your little starting tail. It should be on the opposite side. We're going to join our yarn in the top of the last stitch that we made in row 6. So take your next color, make a slip knot, pick up your rectangle. You're going to slip your hook underneath the top of that first stitch of row, or that last stitch, I guess, of row 6. You're going to join your yarn with a slip stitch. Take that short tail, pull it inside so that it pulls the knot into the inside of your work so that you have a nice straight line running up the edge. You're going to chain 2, just like you never fastened off, you just turned, you chain 2 to begin. That counts as a double crochet. You can really see how that double crochet, or I should say that chain 2 counting as a double crochet, is using that first stitch. That's why we always skip it. Pretend that you've just joined and chain 2. It's already accounted for. So we double crochet immediately into the next stitch. And you're just going to continue with the pattern. Double crochet in every single stitch all the way across. Make sure you double crochet into the top of the chain 2 from the previous row because it's counting as a double crochet stitch. Chain 2, turn, and continue double crocheting. You're still going to have 36 stitches in every single row. Remember, that does include your turning chains. And you're going to work 6 rows for patch number 2, or your middle patch. So if we take a look at our color guide, we've completed our bottom patch. We're now moving to our middle patch, and then we were going to complete the whole thing with top patch there when we're done. But let's not jump ahead. 6 rows of the middle patch color. This is color B for me. Remember to chain 2 and turn at the end of every single row. Every row will have 36 stitches in it. We're at the end of row 12 now, so that's 6 rows of our first color for our first patch, and 6 rows of our next color for our middle patch. And at the end of row 12, you do not have to chain 2. You just need to fasten off, and you can take a moment to weave in that tail, or you can work over top of it. It's entirely up to you. We're moving into our top patch now. This is our last patch, patch number 1. So for me, I'm back to blue, but whatever color patch that is, make sure you check your colorway, your little chart, and grab that color. We're going to begin just like we did for the middle patch. We're going to start with a slip knot. And we're going to join it in the top of the last stitch of row 12. So the last stitch we made at the end of our last patch. Slip your hook into it, join with a slip stitch, and then pull that knot to the inside of your work so that it keeps your edge nice and tidy. You're going to chain 2 to begin. Once again, you can really see why that chain 2 counts as a double crochet and why that first stitch of the row is always accounted for. Double crochet into the next stitch and each stitch across. Don't forget the top of the chain 2 from the previous row. That turning chain always counts as a double crochet, so you don't want to miss it when you get to the end of your row because you want to ensure that you have 36 stitches in every single row. So sometimes it might look a little funny. It doesn't matter what part of the chain 2 you grab, or what part of the top chain, I should say, you grab. Just make sure you grab a piece of the top of the chain 2, double crochet into it, and that will ensure that your stitch count remains perfectly even at 36 all the way across. Chain 2, turn, and you're going to work another 6 rows in total for your last patch. At the end of row 18, we are finished the main build of our square. So you don't need to chain 2 at the end of that last row. Just snip your yarn, fasten off. You can take a moment to weave that tail in back and forth, and then grab your border color, and we're going to add our border. We're going to take our border color, and we're going to start with a slip knot. We're going to join our yarn with a slip stitch in the top of the last stitch of the last row we made. Pull that tail and knot to the inside, keeps it nice and tidy. We're going to chain 2 to begin. This chain 2 is going to count as a double crochet, and we are not starting with an actual corner. So we're going to finish our corner, our last stitch in our corner. We'll be joining with a chain or a slip stitch to the top of this chain 2, but we're not actually starting with a corner. And that will make a little more sense when we get all the way back around. So the chain 2 starts off our border row, it counts as a double crochet. We're going to double crochet into the next stitch and into each stitch all the way across. So we're still using the double crochet stitch. We want to double crochet in the top of each stitch all the way across, and I'll catch up with you at the end of the top of this row. That will be the end of side 1 for our little square border. Once you've worked double crochet into each stitch all the way across, we get to the end of the row, and there's that little chain 2 turning from the end of the previous row. We're going to double crochet into the top of that chain 2, and then we're going to create a corner. So we're going to use that same chain. We're going to chain 2 for the corner space. We're going to double crochet into the same chain. That completes our little corner, and this is the beginning of our first stitch of the second side. So the second side now is working across those raw edges. So what you want to do is work a double crochet pretty much wherever it feels like it belongs. You're going to be working 2 double crochet into the edge of each row. So there's that row. Here's the next row. There's no real fine science to this, but you want to make sure you stick your hook through the actual stitch. So you're bisecting the stitch. You're not just grabbing the top loop because you want it to be nice and sturdy. And you're going to work 2 double crochet into the edge of each row. So sometimes that row edge is a chain 2, in which case you can just put a double crochet in each of those chains. Like that. There's a double crochet in each of those chains of the chain 2, and sometimes it's a double crochet stitch. So you want to just pass your hook through the first set of loops, or the top set of loops, and then pass your hook through the second set of loops, or the bottom set of loops in that double crochet. And there's 2 double crochet worked across a double crochet. So you'll have 12 double crochets per side of a patch. So there's 6 rows in a patch, which means you have to work 2 double crochet in the edge of each row, which means 12 double crochet along the side of each patch. So if it helps to sort of eyeball 12 double crochet across the edge of your patch, do it that way. If it helps to just look at the side of each row as you come to it and work 2 double crochet into the edge of it, whatever works for you. You want to get 12 double crochet into the edge of each patch. You'll have 36 double crochet at the end of this second side. If you really enjoy our show and you have a lot of fun with us here, then consider supporting us. You can subscribe, click the like button, share our videos with your friends, or you can purchase a pattern at our Etsy shop, or join and become a channel member. You'll find more information in the description box down below, links to our Etsy shop, and also how to join, and there's more information if you click that join button below this browser. I've finished working double crochets, so 2 of them into the edge of each row, all the way down that second side, that first raw side, and I've worked 2 double crochets into the edge of that last stitch. So here's the chain that began the whole thing of my foundation chain row. Here's the double crochet that was worked into it. I've worked 2 double crochet into the edge of that. We're going to chain 2 now, and we're going to turn our work so that we're working along the bottom of our square. And the first double crochet I'm going to do is into that first chain. So it's easy to see if you pull up on that little starting tail. So there's the first double crochet right there into that first chain of the foundation chain row. And then you're going to double crochet into the underside of each of those stitches all the way across. You'll have 36 of them. The last one will be in a chain, but I'm going to show you what that looks like when we get there. So there we go. There's my little corner space. It's a little easier to see now. And that's going to square up my square very nicely. So your double crochets are worked into the edge of that stitch. Now you're working double crochets into each of those foundation chains all the way across. And when we get to the end of this row, or I should say this side, I'll show you what chain to work your last double crochet into. I've worked 35 double crochets so far, all the way across the bottom of my square. And now I'm at the very edge of that side. So here is the last little, this is like the chains. These are the chains that we turned after our foundation chain row. So there should be 3 of them here. There's my first double crochet that I made in the entire block. I've worked a 35th double crochet for my border side underneath sort of that stitch. And now I'm going to find the very next chain and double crochet into it. So that's number 36 for the bottom. And you can sort of see it pulls that out, and now there's 2 chains there. So that's 36 double crochet all the way across the bottom of my square. Chain 2, turn, and now we have 2 chains that equal the side of that first row. So you can work a double crochet into whatever pieces of those 2 chains. So I'm going to try and get at least 2 loops because that makes it a bit of a stronger stitch base. Here we go. And right there. So there's my first 2 double crochet worked into the edge of that first row of that patch. And now it's the same thing as the other side. You're going to identify the side of a row. It'll either be a chain 2 or a double crochet. Work 2 double crochets into the edge of that row, or if it helps because you're trying to sort of space them a little differently, you want 12 double crochets across the side of each patch going up that side. This is the last side, so we're on side 4 of our little border row. Just take your time and I'll see you up at the top. I have worked 35 double crochets so far up the edge of my last side, so that's 12 double crochet in the edge of each of those patches. I've got 11 here in my last patch, 1 more to go, and this is probably what you're looking at. So if you've got very little space between your 35th stitch and that same spot where we joined our yarn and chained 2, you can work your last stitch into the top, so the same place that you joined your yarn. But if you've got a little bit of space left, or that side of the stitch is still sort of sitting there, then put your last stitch into the side of that double crochet, and then you can chain 2. You're going to turn your work so you're looking at the top of the chain 2 that began the entire project, or that I should say the entire border. Put your hook through the top of it and slip stitch to join. So the last thing you do is work your 36th double crochet up that last side, chain 2 for your corner space, and slip stitch to join in the top of the chain 2 that began the border row. And that is your February square all done. You can fasten off. Take a moment to weave in that tail and any other tails that might still be sitting there. And remember, you can use it in horizontal stripes or vertical stripes. And there you go, the February square. Pretty fun, pretty quick, great way to bust through your scraps. A lot of different color possibilities and options. Remember, you can look at it vertically too. We hope you enjoyed making that square along with us, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda InStitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have an awesome week. Bye!
Hi everybody, Mr. InStitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.